"Sir, you need to come with us. Right now." The words weren't lowered. They weren't whispered near his ear, the way airline staff are trained to do it. They came out loud, flat, aimed to be heard by every single person in first class on Flight 244 out of Charlotte Douglas. A spoon stopped halfway to a mouth 2 rows back. A laptop lid froze at a 45-degree angle. Even the low mechanical hum of the cabin seemed to hold its breath for a second. Marcus Ellison looked up slowly. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He set his tablet down on his knee, first, still glowing, and only then lifted his eyes to the 2 men standing over seat 2C. 51 years old. Charcoal blazer with no tie. A leather duffel at his feet that had seen more airports than most people see in a lifetime. Nothing about him announced anything. That was always the point. "Is there a problem?" he asked. The taller officer, badge clipped a little too high on his chest, like he wanted it seen before he wanted to be heard, didn't quite meet his eyes. "We need to verify something with you." "Won't take long, then verify it here," Marcus said. "I have my boarding pass right here." Nobody in the cabin spoke. But nobody looked away either, not entirely. A woman across the aisle suddenly found something urgent to fix about her scarf. A man near the window lifted his phone, thumb hovering, not recording, just needing something to hold on to. Marcus noticed. He always noticed. "We'd prefer you step off the aircraft with us," the second officer said, quieter this time, but firmer, the kind of firm that isn't really asking. That was the moment it stopped being a request. Marcus closed the tablet, slid it into his bag, unhurried, the way a man moves when he's already decided that panic is a currency he refuses to spend in front of strangers. He stood, not because he agreed with what was happening, because he understood exactly what was happening, and he had learned a long time ago that some rooms are not worth arguing in. They're worth remembering. "Mind telling me what this is actually about?" he asked, stepping into the aisle. No answer, just a hand gesturing him forward. As he turned, a voice reached him from behind. Low, almost pleased with itself. Knew something felt off about him. He didn't need to look. He looked anyway. Row 2A. A woman in a cream cashmere wrap, silver hair pulled back tight. The kind of posture that comes from decades of never once being questioned in a room like this. Regina Fairweather, though he didn't know her name yet, not for another 11 minutes, dropped her eyes the instant his met hers. Too late. He'd already seen it. Not fear. Certainty. He picked his bag up off the floor and walked forward, past seats that suddenly felt narrower than they had 10 minutes earlier, past a flight attendant who forced a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. The cabin door was open. Cold jet bridge air rolled in against his face, and just like that, in the space of 11 steps, Marcus Ellison stopped being a passenger and became a problem someone needed to solve. Rewind 6 hours. At 4:50 that morning, before Charlotte had finished being dark, Marcus was already at his kitchen table in the Myers Park section of the city. 2 coffee cups in front of him. One his, one poured out of habit for a woman who hadn't sat across from him in 14 years. His mother, Odessa Ellison, used to say that a man who can't sit still in silence has never really sat with himself. He still poured her cup. He still let it go cold. It was the only ritual he'd never once skipped, not for a single morning in 14 years. Not even the morning he closed his first $100 million fund. Odessa had worked 31 years as a housekeeper at a hotel. 2 miles from where he now lived in a house that could have swallowed 6 of the rooms she used to clean. She had raised him alone on $11 an hour and a stubbornness that could crack granite. When he was 9, a manager at that hotel told her, in front of him, that she needed to use the service elevator, that the front lobby elevator was for guests. She hadn't argued. She'd taken her son's hand and walked to the service elevator, and on the ride up she told him, very quietly, "One day you decide which elevator people take, not the other way around." He'd never forgotten it. He built his career on not forgetting it. By 6 that morning, he was at the office of Halden Bridge Capital, the investment firm he'd founded 11 years earlier out of a converted dry cleaning storefront in Noda, now occupying 2 floors of a glass tower downtown with $4 billion under management. In 4 hours, he was supposed to be in New York, sitting across from the executive board of Continental Crest Airlines to finalize a $6.2 billion recapitalization deal, the kind that would let the airline replace half its aging fleet and expand into 11 new domestic routes. He had spent 9 months building that deal from a spreadsheet into something real. 9 months of red eyes, of late-night calls, of rooms where men twice his net worth questioned his numbers before they'd even looked at them. He dressed the way he always dressed for travel days. Plain charcoal blazer, no pocket square, no cufflinks, no watch worth mentioning. Comfortable shoes that had walked through 14 airports that year alone. His assistant, Priyanandan, had once asked him why a man who could fly private, chose commercial, chose coach half the time, chose to blend in when blending in cost him nothing but effort. Because the moment people stop seeing me clearly, he told her, is the moment I learn the most about them. He boarded Flight 244 in the first group, Seat 2C, boarding pass scanned without a second glance. The gate agent had barely looked up. Nobody's system had flagged anything. And yet 19 minutes later, 2 officers were standing over his seat, asking him to step off a plane he had every right to be on. Now, on the jet bridge, the noise was different, less filtered. A luggage cart clattered somewhere down the corridor. The taller officer, whose name tag read T. Holloway, planted himself against the wall and pulled out a small notepad like he needed it for something more than show. Name? Ellison. Where are you headed today? New York. Purpose of the trip? Marcus shifted his bag to his other shoulder. Work. What kind of work? The question sat there a beat too long, like Holloway wanted it to. Marcus studied him now, really studied him, the way he studied a term sheet before he signed it. Meetings, Marcus said. With who? A pause. Not long, just long enough to matter. With your company, Marcus said. Holloway blinked. Once. What do you mean by that? I have a 9 o'clock tomorrow with the executive board of Continental Crest, Marcus said, adjusting his jacket, a small, controlled movement. The airline that owns this plane. The second officer, younger, R. Dustin on the badge, let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh he was trying to swallow. And your role in that meeting, sir? Marcus held his eyes. I'm the one funding it. Silence. Not dramatic, not loud. Just different. The kind of silence that changes the temperature of a hallway. Holloway glanced at Dustin. Something shifted behind his eyes, small but unmistakable. The exact moment a man realizes the ground he's standing on might not be as solid as he assumed 30 seconds ago. Do you have anything to confirm that? Holloway asked. And this time his voice had lost its edge. Marcus didn't answer right away. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and turned toward them. An email thread. Names. Titles. A number that needed no explanation. Investment commitment, pending final signature, 6,200,000. Dustin leaned in, reading faster than he meant to. Neither man spoke. For a moment, the noise of the jet bridge seemed to fall away entirely, and there it was. The truth, plain and unglamorous on a phone screen. The same truth that had been sitting in Marcus Ellison's chest the entire time anyone bothered to ask him a real question. Are we done here? Marcus asked, lowering the phone. Nobody answered immediately, because the question wasn't really about verification anymore. It was about something harder. What happens after 2 men realize, in front of each other, that they were wrong, and that everyone behind that cabin door had watched them be wrong? Holloway cleared his throat, softer now, like a man trying to step back from a hole he'd already fallen halfway into. It looks like everything checks out, sir. Checks out, Marcus repeated. He didn't smile. He didn't push. He just stood there, steady, waiting. Dustin glanced toward the open cabin door. "You're free to return to your seat, sir." "Sir." The word had changed shape. In the space of 4 minutes, Marcus picked up his bag. No rush. No hesitation. Just control. He turned and walked back down the jet bridge. Same distance, same direction. But the air felt heavier now, charged with something nobody had said out loud yet. The flight attendant at the door stepped aside a half-second, too quickly. "Welcome back," she said, her voice careful, measured, the kind of careful that comes after a person realizes they might have made a very expensive mistake. Marcus didn't answer. He walked past her, into a cabin where every head lifted, not as openly as before, but they lifted. A man across the aisle suddenly found the seat back in front of him fascinating. A woman near the window pressed her lips together and stared straight ahead. Row 2A. Regina Fairweather did not look up. Her hand gripped a coffee cup tighter than the cup deserved. The lid bent under the pressure. A thin line of liquid trembled at the rim and did not fall. Marcus paused beside his seat for exactly half a second. Not to embarrass her. Not to confront her. Just to exist there, fully, in the space she'd tried to write him out of. Then he sat down, placed his bag beneath the seat, and opened his tablet. The same motions as before, except nothing about the cabin was the same anymore. Here is what you need to understand about what happened next. Because it is the part that decides everything that comes after. This should have been the end of it. A misunderstanding corrected. A man reinstated. A door closing on a story that most passengers would forget by the time they collected their bags in New York. It was not the end of it. It was the beginning of something Continental Crest Airlines would spend the next 4 months, wishing had never started. And the reason it didn't end there had a name. Vanessa Cole. She was 29 years old, 3 years into her career as a flight attendant, standing in the galley 11 feet from where all of this had happened. She had watched Holloway and Dustin approach seat 2C. She had watched the badge, the radio, the loud voice that didn't need to be that loud. And she had done nothing. Nothing. Not because she agreed with what was happening, because she was terrified of what would happen to her if she didn't follow the chain that had been set in motion above her. 40 minutes earlier, before boarding even finished, Regina Fairweather had leaned toward her in the galley and said quietly, almost conspiratorially, "That man in 2C. He came through the gate awfully fast for someone who belongs up here. You might want to have someone look into it." Vanessa had said nothing. She'd nodded. The way you nod at a customer whose flight status outranks your comfort, and she'd passed the comment to her lead flight attendant, who passed it to the gate supervisor, who called it in as a verification request. Language soft enough to survive a review, hard enough to get 2 officers pulled from their post. Nobody along that chain had asked the obvious question. Verify what, exactly? A boarding pass that had already been scanned. A seat assignment already confirmed? Nobody had asked, because nobody wanted to be the one who slowed down a complaint from a woman like Regina Fairweather, whose family had sat on Continental Crest's very first advisory board, back when the airline was still called Fairweather Grissom Air, 41 years ago. Her name still opened doors that other names had to knock on. This is what a system does when nobody stops to ask a question. It doesn't fail loudly. It fails quietly, at every link, until the last person in the chain is standing over a stranger's seat, saying words that were never really theirs to say. Marcus knew none of this yet, but he intended to know all of it by the end of the day. The plane pushed back from the gate at 9:07. Marcus watched the tarmac crew through the window. Practiced, precise movements, the kind of choreography that looks effortless from a distance and takes years to build. That was the thing about systems, he thought. They run beautifully right up until the moment someone inside them decides the rules apply differently, depending on who's sitting in the seat. The flight attendant, Vanessa, returned with his water. No ice, the way he always ordered it, though he hadn't told her that. She'd overheard it from the first drink service, and the small detail landed somewhere in his chest he didn't expect it to. "I'm sorry," she said, barely above a whisper, setting the glass down. Her hand lingered a half-second too long on the tray table. For earlier. He looked at her, really looked. There was something in her face that wasn't fear and wasn't quite guilt either. Something closer to the first flicker of understanding a person gets right before they realize how deep a hole actually goes. He nodded once. Not forgiveness, not dismissal, just acknowledgement. She stepped away. The plane rolled forward, slow, then steady, then airborne, the city of Charlotte tilting and shrinking beneath the wing. Marcus reached for his phone, scrolled to a contact he hadn't planned to use until tomorrow morning. Daniel Voss, Chief Executive Officer, Continental Crest Airlines. His thumb hovered over the name for exactly as long as it took to decide he wasn't going to let this wait 12 more hours. He pressed call, 2 rings, then a voice, warm, confident, already halfway into tomorrow's meeting. Marcus. Looking forward to sitting down in the morning. "We need to talk now," Marcus said. No pause this time. None at all. Voss went quiet for 3 full seconds. Marcus counted them, the way he counted everything. "That's not like you." "What happened?" "I was pulled off your flight before takeoff." Silence. Then a breath. "Pulled off? For what reason?" "That's the question I'm hoping your airline can answer for me." "They said they needed to verify my identity." In front of an entire first-class cabin, escorted me down the jet bridge, and questioned me like I'd done something. The only thing that got me back on that plane was showing them a screenshot of the deal we're closing tomorrow. Voss didn't interrupt. Marcus respected that. Too many people rush to explain themselves before they've actually understood what they're being told. "That should never have happened," Voss finally said. "No," Marcus agreed. "It shouldn't have. Were you touched? Detained? Arrested?" "No. No. No." Voss exhaled slowly. "That almost makes it harder to fix." "It does," Marcus said, watching the seatbelt light blink off above his head. Because people will call it a misunderstanding, and they'll expect me to move past it quietly." "Will you?" Marcus looked out at the clouds stretching flat and endless beneath the wing. "I want a full accounting when I land. Everyone involved. Everyone who made a decision, and everyone who watched a decision get made and said nothing." "You'll have it," Voss said. Then, quieter, "Marcus, I'm sorry. That's not a company line. That's me." "I know," Marcus said, and ended the call. 2 rows back, unnoticed by almost everyone, a man in a gray suit named Wallace Pruitt had watched the entire jet bridge incident play out through the cabin window and had said nothing while it happened. 68 years old, a wedding ring worn smooth from 40 years of marriage, hands marked by decades of work before he'd ever put on a suit like the one he wore now. He wasn't cruel. He was simply the kind of man who had learned, somewhere along the way, that staying quiet kept the peace, and had never once asked himself what that peace actually cost other people. He leaned across the aisle once the seatbelt light went dark. "Sir, I owe you an apology." Marcus looked up. "I sat right here and watched the whole thing," Pruitt said. "Knew it felt wrong the second it started. Didn't say a word." "You don't owe me anything," Marcus said. "I do," Pruitt said, and something in his voice cracked just slightly, the sound of a man surprising himself. "I should have spoken up. Honest, not cruel." "You should have." Pruitt nodded, jaw tight. "I will next time." Marcus believed him. Not because the promise was dramatic, but because it clearly cost the man something to make it. Real change rarely starts with a speech. Sometimes it starts with one ordinary person deciding silence isn't something they can afford to keep spending. He opened his laptop. Not to work. To write down everything while the memory was still sharp. The exact time he'd been approached, the exact words used, the names on the badges, who had spoken, and who had only watched. Memory fades. Documents don't. The flight landed at LaGuardia a little after noon. Smooth touchdown, no applause, no acknowledgement from the cabin of what had happened before takeoff. For most of the passengers, the whole episode was already becoming a story they'd tell over dinner, embellished a little more with each retelling. For Marcus, it had only just started. He stayed in his seat while the aisle filled with impatience, phones out, bags dropping from overhead bins, someone laughing about a missed connection. He'd learned years ago that the first people to stand are rarely the first people who actually needed to leave. Vanessa was waiting near the aircraft door when he finally rose. Her professional smile was gone. What remained looked almost raw. "Mr. Ellison." He stopped. "I want to apologize again, properly." He nodded, waiting. "I've worked this airline for 6 years," she said, voice unsteady. "I always believed I treated every passenger the same. Today made me wonder if believing that was ever enough." "Sometimes the hardest lesson," Marcus said quietly, "isn't discovering you're a bad person. It's discovering you stopped asking yourself the right questions." She blinked hard, holding something back. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave her a small nod and walked into the terminal, disappearing into the ordinary churn of rolling suitcases and hurried children and travelers, with coffee in one hand and a phone in the other. Exactly how he preferred it. A black sedan waited curbside. His driver, Desmond, stepped out. "Afternoon, Mr. Ellison. You look tired." "Longer morning than expected," Marcus said, sliding into the back seat. Desmond pulled into traffic, and for several minutes neither man spoke. He'd driven Marcus for 9 years. He understood that silence sometimes carried more truth than a full explanation ever could. "Have you ever walked into a room," Marcus finally said, "and realized someone had already decided who you were before you opened your mouth?" Desmond let out a slow breath through his nose. "I'm a black man who's lived in this country 54 years. A small, tired smile. "So, yes, more times than I could count." The words hung there, no further explanation needed. "I thought some of that was starting to change," Marcus said. "It is," Desmond said. "Just not in a straight line." The meeting the next morning did not go the way Continental Crest's executive board expected. They had prepared for a routine closing, signatures, handshakes, a celebratory lunch. Instead, they found Marcus Ellison seated at the head of the conference table on the 14th floor of the airline's Manhattan offices, with a single printed page in front of him, and General Counsel Priscilla Adeyemi seated to his right, a woman he'd flown in from Charlotte at 6 a.m. specifically for this. Daniel Voss opened with the apology he'd promised on the phone, delivered in front of the full board, unscripted, uncomfortable, in a way that told Marcus it was real. Marcus let him finish. Then he slid the printed page across the table. "Before we discuss $6 billion, he said, "I want to discuss one incident. Because if a passenger with a boarding pass, a confirmed seat, and a signature on a $6 billion recapitalization can be pulled off your aircraft in front of 80 witnesses without a single person along that chain stopping to ask an obvious question, I need to understand exactly how deep that chain goes before I put $1 of my investors' capital behind this airline." Silence settled over the room, the way it had settled over the jet bridge the day before. The particular silence of people realizing, together, that the ground beneath them wasn't as solid as they'd assumed. "I want a full internal review," Marcus continued. "Every step, every name, every decision. And I want to know if this is the first time, because I don't believe for a second that it is." He was right not to believe it. The review, led by Priscilla Adeyemi and completed over the following 11 days, uncovered exactly what Marcus suspected. 2 prior incidents in the past 14 months. A Nigerian-American physician removed from a flight out of Atlanta after a passenger complaint nearly identical in language to the one made against Marcus, and a retired Army colonel questioned for 11 minutes at a gate in Houston after a different passenger claimed his boarding pass didn't look right. Both incidents had been logged. Both had been flagged internally. Both had been closed without action, buried in a customer relations database that existed, as far as anyone could tell, mainly to absorb complaints rather than resolve them. The system hadn't failed by accident. It had worked exactly as it was quietly designed to, protecting the comfort of a small number of frequent, high-status flyers at the expense of everyone else, and closing the file the moment the discomfort passed. Regina Fairweather's name appeared in the review 3 times, not as a passenger who'd merely reported a vague concern. As a passenger whose family's decades-long relationship with the airline had, on at least 2 prior occasions, resulted in staff overriding standard procedure to accommodate a complaint that, on paper, never should have gone anywhere. She had learned, over 4 decades of flying this airline, that her word carried a weight other passengers' words didn't. She had never once been asked to answer for that weight. She was asked to answer for it now. Adeyemi requested a formal meeting. Regina arrived at the airline's headquarters in a cream coat that matched the sweater she'd worn on the flight. Composed, unbothered, the posture of a woman who had never in her life expected to be the subject of an internal investigation, rather than the reason one started. I said what I observed, she told the review panel, chin level, voice even. I have every right to raise a concern about my own safety and comfort in first class. That is not a crime. You told a flight attendant a man didn't belong in a seat he had a confirmed ticket for, Adeyemi said. Based on what, exactly? Based on my judgment, Regina said, which I have earned the right to trust after 41 years of loyalty to this airline. Your judgment resulted in a man being removed from an aircraft in front of 80 passengers, with no cause, Adeyemi said. This is the 3rd time your name appears in this file, for functionally the same complaint against 3 different black passengers. Do you understand what pattern that represents? Regina's composure didn't crack. That was the thing about her. It never did, not once, not through the entire review. I raised a concern in good faith, she repeated. The same sentence word for word, every time the question came back to her. I don't apologize for wanting to feel safe on a flight I'm paying for. She never once used the word wrong. Not about the incident. Not about the pattern. Not about the 14 minutes. Marcus Ellison spent on a jet bridge answering questions that were never actually about verifying anything. She sat in that room, and by the end of it, seemed to believe more firmly than ever that she had done nothing but protect a standard that existed only in her own mind. That refusal, not the original complaint, but the refusal to ever once say the words, "I was wrong," was what finally cost her everything. Continental Crest's board voted, 9-1, to permanently revoke Regina Fairweather's lifetime elite status and her family's 41-year advisory relationship with the airline. Her name was removed from the honorary donor wall in the Charlotte hub, a wall that had listed Fairweather Grissom's family since the terminal opened in 1994. The board cited, in language carefully reviewed by legal counsel, a documented pattern of discriminatory complaints resulting in material harm to passengers and a refusal to acknowledge that pattern despite clear evidence. She threatened to sue. Her attorney reviewed the file. The 3 incidents, the internal logs, a recorded statement from Vanessa Cole confirming exactly what Regina had said in the galley that morning, and quietly advised her that a lawsuit would only ensure the story reached far more people than it already had. She did not sue. She disappeared from the airline's frequent flyer records entirely within the month, and from what anyone could later confirm, from air travel altogether. The last anyone at Continental Crest heard. She had moved to a gated community outside Asheville and stopped answering calls from journalists who'd caught wind of the review. She never once, publicly or privately, said the words, "I was wrong." That silence became its own kind of sentence. Holloway and Dustin, the two security officers, received a different outcome, because unlike Regina, they had never claimed to be right. Both were placed on a mandatory 40-hour retraining program focused on de-escalation, verification protocol, and this was Adeyemi's insistence, a full afternoon spent listening, unscripted, to passengers who had experienced exactly what Marcus experienced, describing exactly how it felt from the other side of a badge. Holloway kept his position. 6 months later, he was the one who stopped a nearly identical complaint before it went anywhere, asking the passenger who filed it, calmly, "Can you tell me specifically what raised your concern?" A question nobody had thought to ask before Marcus Ellison forced the airline to build one into its procedure. Vanessa Cole requested a transfer to a different crew rotation, and it was approved. But before her first flight on the new rotation, she did something nobody asked her to do. She enrolled in the airline's new Dignity in Service pilot training, a program that didn't exist 5 months earlier. Within a year, she wasn't just flying. She was teaching new hires, standing in front of a classroom, telling them in careful, unflinching detail about a morning on Flight 244 when she'd chosen silence over a stranger, and what that silence had nearly cost him. Marcus insisted on one more thing before he'd sign anything. He wanted the new program named honestly, not after him, not after the incident, but after what it was actually meant to protect. "Call it what my mother would have called it," he told Voss. "Call it the elevator standard." Voss didn't ask why. He didn't need to. By then, the story had already made its way, quietly, through the company. A housekeeper, a service elevator, a 9-year-old boy who grew up to decide which elevators people take. The elevator standard became mandatory training for every employee at Continental Crest. Gate agents, flight crews, security contractors, regional managers, all the way up to the executive floor. Voss took the training first, publicly, on camera, before requiring anyone else to. 6 months after the deal closed, an independent audit confirmed every reform had been implemented. Reports of passenger complaints resulting in unwarranted removals had dropped to 0. Reports of employees questioning a complaint before acting on it, pushing back internally, asking the harder question before escalating, had risen sharply. Not because prejudice had increased. Because the people inside the system had finally been given permission, and a process, to say something before it became a headline. That weekend, Marcus drove out to see his daughter, Renee, and his 10-year-old grandson, Isaiah, at their home in Ballantine. While the two of them raked leaves in the backyard, Isaiah looked up, curious the way 10-year-olds are curious about everything. "Mom said you were on the news." Marcus smiled for a little while. "Were you in trouble?" "Not exactly." Isaiah thought about that. "Then why was everybody talking about you?" Marcus crouched down until they were eye to eye. They weren't really talking about me. They were talking about how people should treat each other. Isaiah frowned. "Isn't that supposed to be easy?" "It should be," Marcus said, and meant it more than the boy could understand yet. "If somebody's nice to me, I should be nice back," Isaiah said, working through it out loud, the way kids do.
"Right. And if somebody isn't nice?"
Isaiah thought harder this time. "You still remember they're a person," Marcus said, glancing toward the old oak at the edge of the yard, its branches bent and reshaped by 3 decades of storms it had somehow survived anyway. Being kind doesn't mean letting people do wrong things. It means trying to make things better instead of making people smaller. Isaiah nodded slowly. "I think I get it." Marcus hoped he truly did. Children rarely learn from speeches. They learn from what they watch adults actually do when nobody's forcing them to. 6 months after that, Marcus walked back through Charlotte Douglas International. No cameras, no press waiting near the entrance. Just another traveler pulling a carry-on across polished floors. He preferred it exactly that way. The terminal looked almost unchanged. Same departure boards, same coffee stands, Same current of people moving toward their gates. But something in it had shifted. A gate agent greeted every boarding passenger with the same steady patience, whether they moved fast or slow. An elderly man struggled with a heavy suitcase near the jet bridge, and before he could ask, an employee stepped forward to help without being asked twice. Small moments, easy to miss. Marcus didn't miss them, because real culture is rarely built by a speech. It's built by 100 ordinary decisions, repeated on days nobody's watching. Near security, someone called his name. Mr. Ellison, he turned. It was Holloway, the officer from that morning, 6 months older, and somehow more than 6 months more humble. Wasn't sure you'd remember me, Holloway said. I remember, Marcus said gently. Holloway exhaled slowly. I wanted to thank you. You could have had me fired, outright. You didn't. You asked the company to help me get better at this instead. He paused, looking down. My daughter asked me last week why I started volunteering at the community center on weekends. I told her someone reminded me that wearing a badge doesn't make a man right. It just gives him a chance to try to be. Neither man said anything for a moment. Then Marcus extended his hand. Holloway shook it, firm, no bitterness left between them, only understanding, the kind that only survives an honest reckoning. Further on, Vanessa approached, smiling before she even reached him. I thought that was you. You look well. I am, Marcus said. She laughed softly. I've been leading new hire orientation. She pulled a worn notebook from her bag, opened it to the first page. He recognized the sentence immediately. It was the one thing he'd written down that day on the flight, the one line he'd insisted go into the training manual. Following procedure will never excuse abandoning someone's humanity. We read it out loud every Monday, she said, closing the notebook. Then something good came out of a hard day, Marcus said. It did, she said, and meant it. When boarding began, an elderly black veteran, a few places ahead of Marcus in line, fumbled through his jacket for his boarding pass, hands trembling slightly. The gate agent didn't rush him. Take your time, sir, she said. No impatience, no suspicion, just respect. The man found his pass, smiled with relief. Thank you. You're very welcome. It lasted 3 seconds. Most people in that line probably forgot it before they reached their seats. Marcus didn't. Dignity often lives inside moments that brief, and the fact that nobody had to make it a headline this time was, itself, the entire point. Once the aircraft reached cruising altitude, his phone buzzed. A message from Daniel Voss. The airline's first independent culture and trust report had just been released. Passenger trust scores were up. Employee confidence scores were up. Complaints involving unequal treatment had fallen to their lowest recorded level. At the bottom of the report, one line. Culture changes the moment people decide that respect is no longer optional. Marcus locked the screen and looked out at the clouds stretching flat beneath the wing. The $6, $2 billion deal had closed 3 weeks earlier, not because Continental Crest had become a perfect company. No company ever does. It closed because the people inside it had finally chosen accountability over excuses, and action over the appearance of action. The most valuable return on that investment was never going to show up on a balance sheet. Sometimes the strongest person in a room isn't the one holding the most power. It's the one who takes a personal injustice and, instead of letting it curdle into something bitter, turns it into a reason for every person who comes after them to be treated with a little more dignity than they were. That kind of decision outlasts the headlines by a very long time.